Have you ever caught yourself overreacting to something and had no idea why? A small comment makes you feel humiliated. A delay in someone's reply makes you spiral. A mistake at work triggers shame that feels unbearable. You try to brush it off. You tell yourself, it's not a big deal. But deep down, it is. Why? Because the part of you that got hurt in that moment wasn't your adult self. It was a younger version of you, a version you've spent years trying to forget. That child is still inside you, still hurting, still waiting, and still quietly influencing every decision you make. Carl Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we repress, the feelings we're told are too much, too sensitive, too loud, don't disappear. They go underground. They become the shadow. And for many of us, a major part of that shadow is the inner child. The child who was shamed for crying, who was punished for needing attention, who was mocked for dreaming too big, too loud, too different. The child who had to grow up too fast. You think you moved on. You think you became stronger. But what really happened is this. You put that child in a dark room and locked the door. But they didn't stop existing. They just stopped being seen. And the more you ignored them, the louder they became in silence. That's why your reactions sometimes confuse even you. That's why certain wounds never truly heal. That's why you self-sabotage when things go well. That's why you keep chasing people who don't see you. Because that child is still trying to be seen. You're not broken. You're not crazy. You're just haunted by someone you used to be, and you've never given them a voice. Jung didn't just talk about the shadow as some abstract force. He said the shadow is personal. It's the version of you that you weren't allowed to be. The parts of your identity you locked away just to survive. But survival isn't the same as living, and you've reached a point in your life where surviving isn't enough anymore. The truth is, that inner child, the one you thought you outgrew, still runs your relationships, your fears, your reactions, and until you face them, you'll keep mistaking survival patterns for personality. So now, let's do what most people never dare to do. We're going to open that door. We're going to face the child you left behind, and we're going to finally listen, not to fix them, not to silence them, but to understand them. Because until you do, you're not living your life. You're reliving theirs. It started innocently. Maybe you were just 5, or 7, or 10. Someone yelled at you in front of others. Someone you trusted left without saying goodbye. Maybe you were told, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. And right there, a small voice inside you made a decision. Feeling is dangerous. Needing is shameful. Love means proving myself. You didn't say it out loud. You didn't write it down. But that rule carved itself into your nervous system, and your entire personality began forming around it. That's how it happens. We shape our identity around survival. You became the calm one, the funny one, the independent one, the one who doesn't need anyone. But underneath every label was a buried need. Carl Jung said, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. That's why no matter how much you succeed, you still feel empty. No matter how much you give, you still feel unseen. Because you didn't outgrow those wounds. You built your life around them. Think about it. You avoid conflict, not because you're peaceful, but because you associate disagreement with abandonment. You overgive, not because you're generous, but because you learned that love must be earned. You stay silent, not because you're wise, but because you were punished for speaking your truth. You wear these behaviors like virtues, but they're scars in disguise. The inner child didn't disappear. They just learned to blend in, to perform, to fake adulthood. But every time your stomach knots up before asking for something, every time you feel like a burden for having needs, every time you say, I'm fine, when you're breaking inside, That's them, still waiting for someone to finally ask, "What happened to you? What did you need that no one gave?" Jung believed the path to wholeness is not through perfection, but through integration. And integration means pulling that child out of the dark, not to make them disappear, but to give them a seat at the table, to finally make peace with the parts of yourself you were told to hate. This isn't about blame. This isn't about becoming the child again. This is about recognition, about seeing clearly what you've carried and why. Until you name what hurt you, it will continue to write your story. So in this next part, we're going to go deeper. We'll explore exactly how the shadow forms, how repression becomes reflex, and why the people around you often trigger the child in you more than you realize. But first, breathe. You've just taken a step most people avoid their whole lives, and that already makes you powerful. Repression doesn't feel like violence. It feels like adaptation. You learn quickly what's acceptable and what isn't. Not because someone sat you down and explained it, but because of silence. A look, a withdrawal of love, a sudden shift in tone that taught you more than any punishment ever could. So you adjust, you become quiet, you become agreeable. You learn to laugh when something hurts, nod when you want to scream, and disappear when you want to be seen. This is how the shadow is born. Carl Jung described the shadow as all the parts of yourself you had to hide in order to be accepted. Not just your rage, but your joy. Not just your neediness, but your creativity, your sensitivity, your voice. These weren't mistakes. They were you. But they were too much for a world that wanted you smaller. So you buried them, one by one. And the problem isn't just that you buried them. It's that you forgot where you put them. Now, years later, they don't knock politely. They erupt. That's why you lash out at people you love, why you freeze in situations where you should speak up, why you say, "I don't know what's wrong with me," when your emotions overwhelm you. The shadow doesn't stay buried. It shapeshifts. It becomes sarcasm, perfectionism, addiction, defensiveness. It becomes overachievement and chronic guilt. It becomes a relationship pattern you swear you'll never repeat until you do, because that child still wants what they never got, and they will use any strategy to try and get it. The worst part? They do it without your permission. This is why Jung emphasized awareness, not as a buzzword, as a survival skill. The shadow grows strongest in the dark, not because it's evil, but because it was never allowed to be seen. Think of someone in your life who triggers you deeply, someone whose presence makes you feel small, insecure, angry, helpless. That reaction, it's not just about them. It's about the part of you they're waking up, the child who still doesn't feel enough, still doesn't feel safe, still wants someone to rescue them, or validate them, or apologize. But here's the truth. No one's coming. And the more you wait for that apology, that recognition, that moment, the deeper you'll dig the hole. Because the shadow doesn't heal through hope. It heals through honesty. And honesty means facing your own reflection, even when it's ugly. Even when you realize, I've been abandoning myself the same way others once did. But here's the shift. That child doesn't need to be erased. They need to be integrated. And the power you're looking for, it's been locked away with them this whole time. If what you're hearing resonates, if something deep inside you is stirring, don't look away. This isn't entertainment. This is you remembering yourself. So before we go further, take a moment. Click subscribe, not just to support the channel, but to make a promise to yourself that you won't keep abandoning this work. That next time your shadow rises, you'll choose to see it, not silence it. This isn't the end. It's the first time you're facing the beginning. There's a moment, quiet but sharp, when the excuses stop working, when blaming others no longer softens the pain, when distractions lose their power, and you're left face to face with the one person you've spent years avoiding. You, not the version you show the world, not the mask that smiles and says, "I'm fine." The one behind that, the real you, the child you left behind, and the adult who keeps betraying them. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That darkness isn't just your anger, it's your fear of being alone, your jealousy, your guilt, your secret wish to be loved without having to earn it. You can't meditate it away. You can't journal around it. You can't fake peace while bleeding under the surface. At some point, you have to look directly into the mirror and say, "I abandoned myself. I became who they wanted, and I lost who I was." It hurts. God, it hurts. But pain isn't your enemy. Pain is the proof that something inside you is still alive, still waiting, still fighting to be seen. So what does facing the shadow really mean? It means slowing down when your instinct is to run. It means asking, "What am I feeling?" instead of, "How do I fix this?" It means holding space for the part of you that still cries in silence. You've probably heard of inner child work. Most people think it's soft, sweet. Visualize a younger you, give them a hug, and move on. But real inner child work, it's violent, it's raw. It's realizing that the version of you that was punished for needing love is the same version you now punish for being too emotional, too needy, too much. You became your own jailer, and the only way out is to stop repeating what others did to you. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not perfection, not purity, but wholeness. It's not about erasing the shadow. It's about understanding it, letting it speak, letting it grieve, letting it teach you where your real strength lives. You want to be grounded? Start with the parts of you you've buried. You want clarity? Go where your confusion lives. You want freedom? First, unlock the door you locked yourself behind. The child is still there, and they're not your weakness. They're your key. So what now? You've seen the shadow. You've felt the weight of the child you locked away. You've realized you didn't just adapt. You abandoned yourself. But this realization isn't the end of the story. It's the part where most people stop, because it's where the real work begins. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Fate isn't written in stars, it's written in patterns. And those patterns were created when you were too young to know better. They were formed in silence, in the way your voice trembled around authority, in the way you tried to be good so no one would leave, in the way you learned that being small was safer than being real. You weren't raised, you were managed, corrected, shaped, trained to hide what made others uncomfortable. And then, you took over. You became the one who ignored your own needs, who pushed through exhaustion, who smiled when dying inside, who said, "It's fine," even when nothing was. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped waiting for others to neglect you and started doing it yourself. That's the wound. But that's also the door. Healing starts when you stop repeating what hurt you. So what does that look like? It looks like this. You want to cry, and you don't distract yourself. You want to say no, and you say it. You feel rage, and instead of burying it, you listen to what it's telling you. You break the cycle not with a grand gesture, but with small, radical acts of self-loyalty. Not self-love, because love without loyalty is just talk. Start with the things you were never allowed to have. A boundary that doesn't come with an apology. Rest that doesn't require guilt. Joy that doesn't ask for permission. A voice that doesn't check the room before speaking. This is reparenting. It's not hugging your inner child in a guided meditation and moving on. It's war. It's weeping in your car after saying no for the first time. It's shaking as you send the text that says, "I need space." It's feeling like you're betraying someone when you're finally choosing yourself. It's messy. It's not Instagram. It's the real work no one claps for. But every time you show up for yourself, you're telling the child inside you, "I won't leave you again." That child doesn't want perfection. They want protection. And they've waited long enough. You've waited long enough. So don't wait for the apology that's never coming. Don't wait for the parent who never knew how to love. Don't wait for the world to suddenly see your worth. You're the one now. And when you choose yourself, not because it's easy, but because it's right, everything begins to change. You've carried this pain for so long that you forgot what it feels like to move without it. It became your second skin, your invisible weight, your normal. But it was never normal. It was never okay that you had to shrink to be safe, that you had to silence yourself to be loved, that you had to become less of you, to be enough for them. And yet, here you are, still standing, still searching, still trying, not just to survive, but to remember who you were before you learned to perform. That's not weakness, that's power. Real power isn't loud. It's not domination. It's not having answers. Real power is standing in front of your shadow, looking your wounds in the eye, and saying, "I'm not ashamed of you anymore." Real power is returning, not to the past, but to the self that never left, only got buried under expectations, fear, and noise. You were never too sensitive, never too emotional, never too much. You were just too awake for a world that told you to sleep. And now, you're waking up, not in a single moment, not in a dramatic explosion, but slowly, quietly, in how you speak to yourself in the mirror, in what you tolerate, and what you no longer do, in what you chase, and what you finally walk away from. Healing doesn't have a grand finale. It's not cinematic. It's daily. It's the quiet choice to be loyal to yourself in a world that keeps trying to sell you back your own worth. So here's the truth you may not have heard enough. There's nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not too late. You were just never taught how to come home to yourself. Until now. Because home isn't a place. It's the feeling of not abandoning yourself anymore. It's the silence after a storm you didn't run from. It's the stillness that comes from finally being on your side. You'll lose people on this journey. People who only loved the version of you that served them. People who can't handle your clarity, your strength, your no. Let them go. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be reunited with yourself. And the more you come back to that core, the less the world's noise matters. So don't wait for permission. Don't wait for closure. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start now, with breath, with truth, with one decision that says, "I belong to me." This journey doesn't end here, but something old does. The silence ends. The shame ends. The pretending ends. Now, it's your turn to begin, not as the person they wanted, but as the person you've always been becoming. Welcome back.